Well, good morning. Welcome to Local Church.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Local Church. So I'm Michael.
I'm Emily.
This is Emily. Super glad that you are all here today. You braved the weather to be here.
They really didn't.
No,
It was
you
the
didn't.
9:30 people
Yeah,
who did.
it really
But
was.
the roads were probably still flooded, so we could give them that.
And our volunteers that came early as well. We got here when it was really pouring, and I'm wearing waterproof shoes, and my feet are still soaked because I was like walking through the parking lot, and the water was rushing. It was like a little slant, and it rushed over my shoes and
It's
into
good
my
you're
socks.
telling them
And it's
'cause
wonderful.
They were all sleeping.
I know they were. I know.
This
So
is the sleep-in crowd.
yeah.
Yeah.
Although you may have got the alert on your iPhone, like, be careful, stay inside, flood warning. I don't know if you got that or not, but if you did, you guys are the hardcore people who are like, I don't care what you say, phone. I'm going to church today. In fact, if we have any of our leaders in the room, all of our leaders, come on in here. I want you guys to look at the people in this room today because these are the people we need to be recruiting to volunteer. You are the hardcore people. Super grateful for you. So yeah, we're gonna mix it up.
They're also the beach people. Next week they will not be here because it's going to be like 80 degrees and sunny. They're going to the beach.
Oh, so some of you are just here because you can't be at the beach. So I get that. Okay, great. All right. Well, we're glad to have you anyway, especially if you're new or fairly new to local church. Thanks so much for being here. We are mixing it up a little bit. We just thought, it's really rainy. A lot of people aren't going to be here, so maybe we should just do story time. So we're going to do story time with you, and we're going to tell you the local church origin story. We're going to go way back to kind of detail how we got here. Because if you didn't know, if it's your first time here, we're only about 21 months old. So we're a brand new church. I mean, if we were like a baby, would we would maybe be like, what would that look like? Did you tell we don't have kids? We don't have kids, but
2 years,
almost 2 years old, like,
maybe like saying a couple
walking
words.
around, saying a few words.
Yeah, you walk.
Getting into trouble. So yeah, so we'd be
Yeah,
that church,
cool,
getting into
yeah,
trouble, that kind of thing. Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, we thought it'd be fun to just tell you that a little bit of the history of local church, and then what we had planned for this Sunday, we will do next Sunday, and I'm promising you don't want to miss that, and we'll tell you more about that at the end. So to actually begin, I really have to go way back. I want to go back to when I was about 14 years old or so. I grew up Catholic, like most of Long Island. 60% of Long Island is Catholic, and I mean, I didn't mind that, but I didn't really necessarily love going to church. My parents kind of forced me to go, and so I did all the things that you're supposed to do begrudgingly. But really, what was going on in terms of like my own perspective of God was that I always thought that God was similar to Santa, and I just thought, like, man, I keep being told that there's this guy that knows when you're sleeping and he knows when you're awake.
Like,
and
nobody wants to hear that, like, at any stage of life, but certainly not when you're a child. Like, that's extremely creepy.
Well, yeah. So I'm thinking, all right, so he knows when I'm sleeping, he knows when I'm awake, and he knows when I'm like listening to my mom and doing my chores, or if I'm not, and that that some good stuff counts for me, some bad stuff counts against me, and there's a list involved, and I could be on the good side or the naughty side. So I just remember growing up thinking, well, that sounds like God. I mean, if God exists, he's probably has all the same kinds of powers. He can see my life, and he knows when I'm sleeping, he knows when I'm awake, he knows if I'm good or bad, which was fine when I was in elementary school. Because I was like,
well, come down my chimney creepily in the night.
Yeah, that was fine in elementary school because I mean, I was an elementary school kid. Like, well, I didn't get into that much trouble. But then I got into junior high, and then I got into high school, and then all of a sudden, I was getting into stuff that I knew I probably shouldn't get into this, but I'm going to get into it anyway. I'm going to do it anyway. And that caused a lot of guilt and shame, even internally. Nobody ever really made me feel that way, but I knew, like, what I'm doing is not so great. And what I'm doing is causing other people to kind of, like, get hurt. I'm leading other people astray. And I just remember feeling so guilty and shameful. And that guilt and shame was only enhanced anytime I ever thought about God or anytime I ever thought about church. Because I thought, man, if God is mindful of me at all and he knows what I've done, he just must be disappointed. He just must be angry with me. And perhaps maybe some of you have some of the same or similar thoughts that surely if I walked into a church building, like you took a risk coming here today, because it's like if I walk into a church building, it's just going to come and it's going to collapse down on me. You ever met people like that? I mean, there are people like that all the time. They're like, God must be so angry. He doesn't want anything to do with me. That's what I used to think. And then one summer, when I was 14, my family loaded up into our RV, and we drove to Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, about 1,200 miles from here. And my aunt and uncle, my grandfather lived there, and so we were going to visit them. And the first night that we got there, I'm kind of meeting this part of my family for the first time, so I want to make a good impression. And unfortunately for me at that time, my aunt, one of the first things that she does, she comes up to me and she says, "You should go to our church tomorrow night." And there I am like, "Are you serious, lady? Like, it's my vacation. I don't want to do boring stuff on my vacation. Like, you're going to make me go to church?" But that was all inward. Outward, I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'll go to your church tomorrow."
Some of you are here this morning under a similar, that happened to you this morning.
Somebody lured you to
lured
church
you.
today.
You said,
Maybe it was us because we told them we were going to get them ice cream.
well,
Today,
that was
yeah,
real.
we lured you with the ice cream, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, you will get ice cream after this. But anyway, so I told her, yeah, sure, I'll go to your church. I really didn't want to go to her church, but I did. And it was a Wednesday night. It was like a youth group thing. And so I go there, and I just remember being like surprised because everybody there was dressed normal. They all genuinely seemed like they wanted to be there. And more than that, they seemed like they wanted me to be there. Like they were happy I was there. There was some dude in the corner with like an acoustic guitar playing and singing songs. Everybody was singing along. I was like, man, I've never seen a church like this before. And at the end of the night, I'm brand new to all this. At the end of the night, the youth pastor, your typical youth pastor, he's just goofy guy, bald, wearing a bright orange shirt that said "Stoked" on it, tucked into jean shorts with socks and sandals. That guy, like, he comes strutting over to me, like, "Hey," like comes to see, introduces himself. And he asks, he says, "Hey, what's going on? What's your name?" Whatever. And we start talking. And then his name is John Webb. And then he asked me the most important question that anybody has ever asked me. He looked at me and he said, "Hey, so Michael, what do you know about Jesus? What do you know about Jesus?" And both of us figured out really quickly that I didn't know really anything about Jesus. I had seen Jesus on a statue, like on a cross. I mean, that's pretty much all I knew about Jesus. And then he began to like talk to me about what he knows about Jesus. And up until this point, all I had thought of whenever I thought about church or God or Jesus was that God's just mad at me. God's just disappointed. God just distant. He's just far off. Surely he could care less about me. But then he began to like talk to me about how he viewed God and what his perspective of God was. And I just never heard of it that way before. Like he began to talk about God as if God was actually loving and kind and compassionate and forgiving and full of grace. And I just remember like being so curious about this, like I never thought of it that way. And I think that he opened up the Bible and that he showed me what was written in what's called the letter of Romans. It was a letter written by the Apostle Paul. I think that's the passage of Scripture that we went to. I'm not 100% sure. I should probably ask him. But if he did, I want to just read for you the passage of Scripture that I think he read to me. And this was just so transformative for me and it helped me shift the way I thought about God. So this is what it says in Romans chapter 3. This is, again, written by the Apostle Paul, who actually hated Christians and tried to stomp out Christianity. And then he actually became a Christian. This is back in the first century. And when he did, he became like one of the most famous Christians, and he started starting all these brand new churches all around the Mediterranean rim. And then he would keep up with the churches by writing letters to them. So this is one of the letters that Paul wrote to the church in Rome. And here's what he says about God. He says this in Romans chapter 3. "But now God has shown us a way to be made right with him without keeping the requirements of the law, as was promised in the writings of Moses and the prophets long ago." So I could understand this as a 14-year-old because I was thinking, okay, yeah, to me, God is all about the rules. And I know I've broken some of the rules. I don't even know what all the rules are, but I'm sure I've broken them by now, right? So I can understand that. Like that there's this law and I need to keep the law, and if I don't keep the law, then I'm not going to be okay with God. That makes sense to me. But now I'm hearing, but did you know that God's made a way for you to be all right with him, even if you haven't been perfect, even if you haven't kept the law? And that was intriguing. So I'm okay, well, tell me more. So Paul goes on. He said, we are actually made right with God by placing our faith in Jesus Christ, by placing our trust or our confidence in Jesus. This guy that I, kind of knew about, he was on a statue on a cross, that's where I'd seen him. And Paul goes on and says, and this is true for everyone who believes, no matter who we are. Whether you're living in the 1st century, the 2nd century, the 21st century, and you're living in Israel, you're living in America, wherever you are. This is true for everyone who just simply believes. That is, you are convinced that it's true, that you're convinced that this really is what God is like, that God could be this loving, that God could be this forgiving, that he would love you so much that he would send his son to make a way for you to be right with him, despite the fact that maybe you haven't been perfect. And so here I am, 14, like, okay, all right, I think I see that. And he goes on to say this, for everyone, go ahead to the next screen, for everyone has sinned. Now, this is actually kind of comforting, right? To think, because, when you're like wrestling with your own guilt or your own shame, doesn't it always feel like you're the only one? Like, oh man, I'm the only one who's dealing with this. And Paul's like, no, we all deal with this. And to sin really just means to harm somebody else. Harm yourself or harm somebody else that God loves in some way, with your words, with your actions, with your behavior, anything like that. So Paul's saying, hey, everyone is guilty of this. Nobody's perfect, right? And we all know that. So everyone has sinned, Paul says. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. Yet God, in his grace, which is his unconditional love, which is his unmerited favor, he freely makes us right in his sight. So despite the fact that we're not perfect, despite the fact that we have sinned, he's made a way for us to be right. Now I want you to think about this for a second. If you're a parent in the room, think about how you would feel if somebody hurt your child. If somebody, slandered your child, gossiped about your child, abused your child, and so think about how you would feel about that. That person, that offender, they would not be okay with you, right? Because they're not okay with your child. So what do you do with that? And this is kind of like the dilemma that God is in. It's like, well, I love you and I care about you, but you've hurt my child. You're hurting each other. So Paul's saying, hey, did you know that God has found a way to make everything okay, to make everything right? And Paul's going to tell us how. He says this, he did this through Jesus Christ when he freed us from the penalty for our sins. That Jesus had a purpose. That when Jesus stepped foot on the planet 2,000 years ago, fully God and fully man, he did so with a purpose. He did so with you in mind and with me in mind to free us from sin. So what does that mean? Paul goes on, he says, for God presented Jesus as the sacrifice for sin. In other words, he took the punishment that I deserved for all the things that I've done to hurt other people that God loves. For God presented Jesus as a sacrifice for sin. People are made right with God when they simply, can you say this with me? Believe. When they believe that Jesus sacrificed his life, shedding his blood. When they become convinced that this is true, that God isn't necessarily, he's not like some angry, judgmental, disengaged bully, the old man upstairs who could care less about us. No. When we see God a different way, when you see God as, well, maybe he is loving and kind and full of grace and actually can forgive and is compassionate enough to forgive and so willing to forgive that he would send his only son to die on behalf of me. I mean, if you just are convinced that that's true, then now you can actually be made right with God. You don't have to live with that guilt or that shame anymore. And this was like water to my thirsty soul. I just remember hearing about this and thinking, if that's what God is like, then I'm in. That's what I need. And let me just tell you one more thing. The reason why I tend to take the Apostle Paul seriously when he writes this is because the reason why the Apostle Paul followed Jesus isn't because of something that he heard. It's because of something that he saw. He literally saw Jesus after Jesus had been crucified and killed and dead and buried. 3 days later, Jesus came back to life, and he presented himself, not to a couple people, not to a couple dozen people, but to hundreds of people, including the Apostle Paul. And when the Apostle Paul saw a resurrected Jesus, everything changed for him. And all of a sudden, he was convinced that God really is who Jesus said he is. Because once you predict your own death and resurrection and then pull it off, I tend to just believe what you have to say at that point. And the Apostle Paul did too. And so the reason why I'm convinced that this is true, that this is what God is like, that God cares so much about you and so much about me that he would make a way for us to be made right with him, the reason why I believe that's true is because Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection, and he actually pulled it off. So that night for me, with John Webb, just kind of sharing this with me for the first time. I mean, it didn't all click like it has. I wouldn't have been able to articulate it back to you on that very night. But something in my heart changed. As I had heard that, something in me got transformed. So much so that I just decided, yeah, I want to do this. Because he said, hey, would you like an opportunity to just take a moment for yourself and just like have a moment with God and just tell God, yeah, you know what? I do believe. I am convinced that this is true. Thank you. And I did that. And everything changed for me. It started with like an inward transformation, which then eventually evolved into an outward transformation. All of a sudden, the things I was doing and the things I was saying and the way I was behaving began to change as well. But it changed so much for me. I'll tell you that. I got home that night and I was like, Mom, Dad, like something crazy happened. And you know what? Can I stay the school year? I know we're supposed to be leaving next week, but I want to stay for the rest of the summer. And so let me stay for the rest of the summer because I want to keep going back to church and learning more. And then by the end of the summer, I called them like, can I stay for the school year? And they're like, yeah, one less kid in the house for a year? Sure. Stay. Be their problem. So I got to stay my sophomore year of high school in Missouri. I learned how to play the guitar. I started singing in church. I mean, it was a transformative year for me. And then I moved back to Long Island for my junior year of high school. Had a year, doing things around here until about a year after that actually is when you and I met. And I've been doing all the talking so far. So why don't you tell them what that was like?
Similarly to Michael, I grew up. I went to church a lot growing up, but to me, like church was something I did sort of like the way that I was also a Girl Scout growing up, like, and I played sports, whatever. Like I participated in church, like similarly to like how I would do Girl Scouts. Like it was just like something fun to do to like kill my time. Like, I would go and have fun with other people, but there was nothing like, today when I think about, I don't think of myself as like still being a Girl Scout, right? And I think like if I'd continued down the path of how I just kind of went to church as a thing to do, like I don't think it really would have impacted my life. But my life was changed really when I went from just like church being this like fun, like social activity to encountering a group of people. I was actually at a youth group in Patchogue. I encountered a group of people my own age who really seemed to like know God, like they knew him on a personal level. And when I saw people who lived that way, like I wanted that for myself too. I didn't want to just be someone who goes to church for fun, but someone who actually knows and experiences God. And so things changed for me a lot when I encountered that friend group and realized that God is who he says he is. And then wanting to participate in that community and create a community like that for other people was really important too. So the youth group that I went to is actually where I met Mike. When I was 16, my mom said you could start dating when you're 16. So I found someone to date when I was 16. And then you know what my mom said? You can date when you're 18. So here we are. This is actually our first youth group trip together. We went to Paradise Lake, like in the Poconos or whatever. And I'll never forget the very first, this was one of my first youth retreats. And the speaker, Scott Jones, he was talking about how important it is to control your mouth, like watch your words, basically. And when I was like 16-year-old Emily was learning about the weight of her words. And I just think that I was remembering this the last couple of weeks as that was our sermon series for the last few weeks, and it reminded me actually of Paradise Lake and being there with Scott Jones teaching us. So
it's it's one of my goals every day to make Emily that happy. Look how happy she is in that picture, right? So sometimes
I'm like a teenage girl being serenaded.
I know.
Boy, of course I was happy. We'd all be happy.
It doesn't work anymore. I take my guitar out now. She's like, really? Aren't you going to do the dishes? You get your guitar out? No, it's not true. So a couple of years later, here we are at, I think, Emily's senior prom. Aw, I had Justin Bieber hair before he had Justin Bieber hair. That was super cool. Yes. And this is relevant to the local church origin story because it was right around this time when Emily and I were going to True North, which is a fantastic church right now they're in Bohemia, but back when we were in high school, they were in Terryville near Port Jeff. I'm living in Mastic Beach, so I'm driving like 45 minutes to go to church every Sunday at True North. We would go to the evening services. And one day we can remember Emily and I and a group of our friends, we get done with the church service and we're all standing out in the parking lot afterwards and we just start talking. And we started fantasizing about like, hey, what if one day we started a church? Like, and I always thought like, I'll be the music guy. My friend Dave could be the pastor. My friend Blaze could be the youth pastor. Like it's going to be great. So we're just sitting and we're just dreaming, right? And we realize now, looking back, we feel like God maybe put that dream in our heart way back when we were teenagers.
We thought everybody dreamed of starting a church. You did, right? When you were a teenager,
yeah, of course.
Surely you did. But then as we got older, we realized that that's kind of God does things like that to maybe help to plant seeds for what He wants for you to do with your life.
Yeah, so we didn't immediately jump into starting a new church. Instead, we got married. This is a photo of us on our wedding day. That would have been a bad church, yeah. So this is us on our wedding day. We got married on 6/9/12, so we just celebrated our 11-year anniversary, which is awesome. And then even after we got married, we were still not thinking about any sort of church job or starting any new churches. Instead,
everybody said we were too young to get married. And when I see this picture, I'm like, okay, I kind of can understand what they were saying now.
Yeah. So rather than getting involved in any sort of church stuff after we got married, we actually just took a 4-year-long honeymoon, and we worked on cruise ships for 4 years. So this is us in Antarctica on a cruise ship. I was a musician. Emily taught some cool computer classes, which was kind of neat. And we just loved our time on the cruise ships traveling. It took us to all 7 continents. It was an incredible season of life.
Yeah, if you come back next week, Michael will share more about what the cruise ship years really meant, but what it meant for local church, at least, I'll share that. So for us, when we were on the cruise ship, we were forced, to live life and experience so many different types of people, people with different beliefs than we have, people who lived their lives far differently than we did, and for unfortunately, it's kind of embarrassing to admit it, but up until that point in our life, we kind of only experienced one type of person who lived their life one type of way and had one type of belief. And so this was so eye-opening to us, and it was really forced us to understand that God has created people a whole lot of different ways, and they're all equally loved by God. So in other words, it made us a much more accepting people. It made us a lot better at understanding that not everybody sees the world the same way. So this was a really important few years in our life, because God used that to demonstrate how important it is to honor everybody that we encounter. And that's kind of where our core church value of honor others came from. It came from these years that we had experiencing that on the cruise ship. So
yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. All right, so right after our season of cruising, towards the end of that, my pastor from Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, called me, and he said, hey, it had been many years since I had seen him, and he said, hey, we would like to hire you to come and be the music guy at our church. And so at first I said no. And then a year later, we called him back. We're like, hey, we're done with the cruise thing. Is that job offer still available? Because we think that we may go that direction. And he's like, absolutely, come. So we moved to Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, and I became the music guy. Eventually became the executive pastor. Emily started out when we moved to Missouri as a high school teacher, and then she started working at the church that we were at because we were just growing like crazy and we needed more staff members. And so this is Emily and I at our church in the Midwest. Go to the next screen, Andrew. Yep, this is Emily and I there. And then on June 23rd, 2019, I had a weird Sunday where I was in church, and I just kept getting this question that just kept popping up in my mind. And I knew I had no business asking this question. I had no reason to ask this question. So I felt is this God? This is typical Jesus, he answered, he gave 3 answers, and he asked 300 questions, if you look through the New Testament. So I'm is this a Jesus question? And the question was, as I'm sitting there in service, it was just, who's doing this on Long Island? And it just kept popping up as we're singing songs, doing baptism, talking about outreach, opening the Bible. Who's doing this on Long Island? Who's doing this on Long Island? And so after the 10th time, I'm okay, fine. Who's doing this on Long Island? I could care less about Long Island at that point. I'm it's noisy. There's potholes, it's high taxes. I don't want to go back to Long Island. But I'm all right, who's doing it on Long Island? So I start thinking about all the churches that I do know of on Long Island. So I'm, listing them off, and I get to 6. And there's way more than 6 churches. But I stopped at 6 because in that moment I was realizing that in Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, there are literally 6 churches on the street that we were on. In 2.3 miles, you had to pass by 5 great churches just to get to ours. I mean, you could throw a rock and hit a church in the Midwest, a good one. That's just how it is. And so After that day, I was like, let me look up some of these statistics. And I realized nationwide, there's one church for every 1,300 people. So if everybody decided to go to church on Sunday, every church, and they spread out equally, every church would have 1,300 people. But on Long Island, there's only one church for every 4,300 people. So there's a pretty big gap.
We need more chairs.
We need more chairs, for sure.
Fit.
So that kind of started that reignited that dream in our heart. And we started thinking and praying more about that. And the more and more we were praying more about should we go back to Long Island? Should we try to start a church? The more and more we thought about that, the stronger and stronger that dream became, until I turned 30. And I remember thinking nothing's going to happen when I turn 30. It's just a number, right? But then I turned 30 and something did happen. All of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I'm 30. And I started thinking that went by really fast, really fast. And before I know it, I know I'm going to blink and I'm going to be 60. Another 30 years is going to go by. And I began to think when I'm 60 and I look back on my life, is there going to be anything that I'll regret? And I started thinking I think I will regret it if we don't try. I won't regret trying and failing because at least I tried. But if we never tried to start a church, I'll wind up regretting that. And I think that God kind of used that to help kind of propel us along until eventually, right in COVID time when everybody was making crazy life changes, we were like, it's time.
Baking bread, and we're over here maybe we should start a church.
So we did, and we decided we don't want to go just rogue and be lone rangers and just go start a church. We really want to have a family behind us, supporting us, people that we can call to encourage us and that we can celebrate with.
Or who could just tell us we were completely bonkers.
Exactly, yeah.
We needed to reel it in or something.
So we found an incredible church planting residency program where we can get some training and some coaching. And this is a picture of us at our last day at the church that we worked on. And this is kind of our pastor just praying for us before he sent us off to Grace Church, which is this next picture. This is us on our first day of our residency. So we spent about 9 months in Kansas City, again, getting coaching and training and affirmation as well that we can do this. We had some serious testing and all sorts of things. And now I think it was April of 2021 when we were finally ready to move to Long Island and begin the work here on the island. And so this is a moving day for us. In Kansas City, we picked up these two guys. You think that
recognize Nick and Sarah?
You think that we're crazy? You probably think that we're crazy for starting a church. Anytime you hear, I imagine if you hear starting a church, can you even start a church?
Well, the really weird thing is people are you came back to Long Island. We're trying to leave Long Island. Why would you ever come back once you left?
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of people were thinking we were really, really crazy. But Nick and Sarah are truly the crazy ones because
yes, they are.
They had never even been here and they decided to move here. And they had a lot to learn once they did move here. That is quite different. And Nick, I'll never forget. It's so funny to me because he, after they were living here a little while, we're talking about how he's liking it, what he likes this, likes her. He's like, oh, everything's great. The thing that is the worst about Long Island though is that you have to hold down the pump to fill up your gas tank. There's no little hook there. You have to hold it the whole time. And we're just okay.
Which always makes me
thing for you.
It is the worst. It is the worst. It always makes me think who was the guy who ruined it for all of us? Who was the guy that did something stupid in New York State was yeah, get rid of them all.
Well,
we don't want that happening again.
They really messed up in Jersey.
Yeah, they did.
It.
Yeah, for real.
Maybe that's better off. I would like that.
Yeah. So anyway, we moved back to Long Island April 2021, and we had two simple goals as soon as we got here. We need to find a building and build a team. And so we did a lot of work scouting for locations. We sent a lot of emails. We literally physically went and dropped off a lot of letters, just asking people if they had space that we could rent, even if it was just on Sunday mornings. This building right here, there's actually 4 churches in our one building. There's Village of Faith. Then we're on the other side. There's us. And then there's 2 Spanish churches that meet here as well. And we're just so grateful. This was the first place that we emailed, and they got back to us really quickly, and it just worked out so perfectly. So we feel like God kind of just paved the way for us to be right here, and we're so glad that we are. So the building part was actually easier than building a team. But we would sit down with all of our friends, the people that we knew. We'd ask them, do you know anybody else who might be interested in this? Do you guys want to help us start a church? And again, we just get these looks
I think the
No.
weirdest thing to people was like, where is the church? And we're like, we don't know yet. So like that was really, it was really difficult until we had like a physical build. Like, what are you inviting me to? Like, it sounded really creepy and weird at first. So
Yeah.
it got easier once we had the building.
And then, so eventually it was slow but steady. We began to build our team until this is about August of 2021. We had just gotten into this building, and our team grew to about 12 people. So we've got Luann and Charlie. This is Emily's parents, Kevin and Colleen, JW and Kathy, and Nick and Sarah. And then I think there was a few others who didn't make it into this picture. But this is us standing like right over there. We had to do some serious renovations in this building, so it looks a little bit different than what it looks like now. But yeah, when we sat down with people, we just tried to share with them what we're sharing with you, like this vision that like we feel like God's given us to reach people who were like us when we were younger, who, you know, we knew about God, but we didn't really think much. And but the thoughts that we did have were more negative. It was more like, well, we think that God maybe is disappointed, or maybe that God's distant, or maybe why would God care about me, right? And so for us, we would sit down with people and would tell them like, we want to help inspire Long Islanders to follow Jesus. Like we want to help them see God in a different way, to see God the way the Apostle Paul saw God, to see God the way Jesus taught God was like. And so some people were like, we're on board, like Kevin and Colleen, and we're so glad. And so it took a while, but we began to slowly build the team. And while we were doing that, we were also doing some crazy renovations. Check out this picture. This is the cafe right now that's out there. That's what it looked like at first. So we had a lot of work to do, but thankfully we got it all done. And then we had our launch day, which was October 10th, 2021. And on launch day, we remember probably like 15 minutes before a service was supposed to start. We were looking at our watches,
Maybe
like,
even said, I don't know.
is
But I was
anybody
like,
gonna
all right,
come?
no one's coming. Like, this is our church. Like the 12 of us, you know. I'm like, this is it. It's great. This is so exciting.
But then, like 5 minutes before we started, the people started coming through the doors, flooding through the doors. Really, we wound up having 125 people here on launch day, and here's our team for launch day. It was an incredible day. It was like a dream realized. So we were so grateful to be able to do it with so many amazing people. So again, for anybody who's new, for anybody who doesn't know, the reason that we do exist is because we are here. Everything that we do, we're here is to together we will inspire Long Islanders to follow Jesus. This is our mission. Everything we do is in an effort to accomplish this mission, because we just think that everybody follows something, whether we realize it or not. We're all following something. Could be wherever the biggest paycheck is. It could be we're following after that cute boy or that cute girl. It could be like I'm just following whatever my strongest emotion is right now. I'm just going to do whatever that tells me. We think everybody follows something. But following Jesus will make your life better and make you better at life. That is like thinking about God the way Jesus thinks about God. Managing your emotions the way Jesus managed or taught us how to manage our emotions. Managing your relationships the way Jesus taught, your finances, and every part of your life. We think following Jesus will make your life better and make you better at life, because that's been our experience and the experience of so many people that we know. So we're here to hopefully change the way people think about God, change the way they think about church, so that they'll be inspired to follow Jesus at their own pace. And part of the way we do that is by accomplishing our vision, which is our preferred picture of the future, which is simply to be a church that unchurched people love. And by unchurched, that's just our concise way of saying people who don't like church, people who stopped going to church, people who are like me, who are like, I don't want anything to do with that church stuff anymore. Our hope is that anytime they encounter local church, whether it's here in the building or some sort of event that we're doing, or they encounter those of you who call local church home, if they encounter you in the community in some way, our hope is that they will leave that encounter and think to themselves, I loved that. I mean, I may not believe what they believe. That's okay. But I'm glad that they're here. And I'm really glad that they're in our community. Our community is better off because of it. So that's our mission and that's our vision. And then our values. Emily hit on this a little bit before, but we've got like 3 core main values that we want to live by. Values is just how we behave based on what we believe. And our values are to be honest, honor others, and have fun.
So these values, like as we were at the residency, this is where we were praying and like asking God, like, what do you see in this church? Like, what do you want local church to be like? And we actually took time and read through all the gospels, which are just the accounts of Jesus's life that you can find in the Bible. And as we read through it, we're like making notes about what we saw Jesus to value, like what were some things he valued. And we like made a whole big sheet with all of the things like written out. And I remember one of the things that Mike wrote down is Jesus seems to value naps. And so we were
He took a couple naps.
Like, we were going to say, be honest, honor others, and take a nap. But it just felt off. So.
Anybody get on board with that? I mean, naps, right? I love naps.
Put that into the have fun. Like,
yeah.
Naps are fun. Anyway, so we compiled all this stuff together, and we talked about it. We argued about it a lot, and then these are the things that really felt like we both really felt like God was steering our church in this direction. And I'll tell you, I don't think I've ever been so humbled or amazed when God has brought some of you like into this church, and you've said things like, this is the exact church. The way that local church is exactly what I've been praying for, or I've been searching for a church just like this, or I just moved to this neighborhood and I've been hoping there would be a church like this. And it's just like amazing and humbling, and it's evidence for me of the fact that like God does work in mysterious ways, but He is working. Like we're in Kansas City in 2021, and He's guiding and directing a church to answer your prayers. That is like an incredible experience. And yeah, I know we've done a lot of talking about us and like what God has spoken to us and the direction that God has asked us like lead this church in. But I will tell you, I really believe that, each and every one of you, I said this earlier this morning, every single one of you has a story. And I think that God brought each and every one of you into this church to do the very same thing. Like, it's not just us. We can't inspire Long Island to follow Jesus alone, and nor can just our volunteer team. It's really every person who comes and who is inspired themselves to follow Jesus, then carrying that torch forward and continuing to do it. I think that's God's plan A. That's how He intends to reach Long Island and inspire them to follow Jesus. So anyway.
Yeah, and you get to be a part, for those of you who call this place your home, you get to be a part of something so unique that God is doing, like something that He started from the very beginning. There's something unique to being a part of a church that's 100 years old. That's great. None of us will ever experience that here, at least, because we won't live to see this church be 100 years old. But there is something so unique to being part of something brand new, right? You get to be kind of a part of like what the churches that the Apostle Paul was writing to in the New Testament. They were all new churches. This is a new church. Like, we get to grow together and be on mission together, and that's so exciting. So here's just a couple things that, if you do call this place your home, or you're thinking about making this church your home, here's just a few really practical next steps that you can consider taking that I think will go a long way. And it's simply following on social, which is the cool way of saying follow on social media, Instagram or Facebook. Most of the people who come here, when I ask how you
Threads. The newest social media
that's
thing
right. Yeah.
That we are now on.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Most of the time when I ask people, how'd you hear about local church? They'll tell us, friend invited me or something. But the second most common answer is social media. I saw it on Instagram, or I saw it on Facebook or something. So just by sharing or liking posts or whatever, you never know who you might reach and who might be inspired to come because of that. The other thing you could consider doing is volunteering. We have an incredible volunteer family here. Volunteering enriches your life. It makes you happier. I mean, you can just read study after study about that. And we have awesome ways to do that every single week. So we're doing meaningful things with awesome people all the time, and we'd love for you to be a part of that family. And lastly, joining a group. This is a great way to just get connected, to make some new friends, and to have fun with that.
Yeah, and if there's any other questions you guys have about the church, or questions that I don't know, it could apply to things we've talked about today, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out on social media. You can just email either of us. It's either Emily or Michael, and then at localchurchli.com. But we'd love to help you take whatever your next step is. It might not be something on the screen right now. It might be something else, and we'd love to come alongside you and help you take those steps.
We're a small enough church that you can just corner us too. Just find us and just talk to us. But lastly, I want to say thank you again just for being here for this. It's been fun to kind of just rethink about like the origin stories of local church and share that with you. But I want you to know, please don't miss next week, because we're going to dive even deeper into our 3 values. I'm really, really excited about that, and I hope that you'll be here to join us. Plus, we will actually have the ice cream truck here next week as well. So you'll get ice cream today, but it'll just be like regular ice cream. Next week is like a good ice cream. So don't miss that. We good? Anything else?
No, I was just going to tell them it's the king of cones. Anybody ever had ice cream from him? I don't know, but he's coming next week.
Awesome.
After both services, either service.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm just gonna say a quick prayer. It looks like we're out of time. So let me say a quick prayer for us, and we'll get out of here. Thank you so much, Heavenly Father, for this incredible opportunity to be a part of something new that you're doing on Long Island. Thank you that all of us, in some way, get to be involved in that. Thank you that you made a way for us to be made right with you, so we don't have to have any shame or guilt or any of that. But God, we can look to you and we can have a relationship with you, knowing that you are love and you are good and you are kind and you are humble and you are compassionate and forgiving and full of grace. I pray that for anybody in here maybe who hasn't thought of you that way, that just like I needed to hear that and it changed my life, I pray, God, that it would do the same for anybody here, anybody watching. God, that you would again just move in our lives, help us to follow you, God, because following you really does make life better. It makes us better at life. And I pray that you help us all know individually what our next best step would be on our faith journey and on our journey here with local church. Would you just give us the wisdom to know what to do next? Maybe for some of us, it's, yeah, I'm going to take that step and volunteer, or I'm going to start giving, or I'm going to join a group, or I'm just going to be faithful in coming, whatever it might be. Help us know what our next step is. And then would you help us know what our next step is collectively as a church, and how we can continue to make an impact on our community, continue to make an impact on Long Island, so that more people would be inspired to follow Jesus, and God, so that you would be honored. And again, we just thank you so much for this incredible opportunity to be a part of what you're doing through local church. We pray that you'd be honored through it. In Jesus' name, amen.